Thank you everyone so much for attending this evening. The talk is called Zombie Neoliberalism, Taxes and the Common Good, and we're so pleased that Alex Himelfarb is here and he's going to be in conversation with Jesse Hajer. And we're so glad that all of you could be here on this snowy evening in downtown Winnipeg. It is my honor to acknowledge the land we're on to start. We're all here together on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation here on Treaty 1 territory. And beyond recognizing the importance of land and place, we acknowledge our responsibility to contribute to solutions to the problems caused by past and present colonial policies in Canada. We are committed to contributing research that builds on the strengths of Indigenous communities, respects the spirit and intent of the treaties, and is done in partnership with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people and organizations. And it is our hope this evening that by learning how our economy and governments can be reoriented around equity, meeting the needs of people where they are at, and climate action with Indigenous communities at the forefront, that we can all contribute to rectifying colonial harms and supporting a more inclusive society and economy. My name is Molly McCracken, and I'm the Manitoba Director at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and I have the pleasure of doing the introductions this evening. I want to give a special thank you to the Union Centre for having us here in their beautiful space on the second floor. Thank you very much to our sponsors, the University of Manitoba Economics and Society Group, particularly Dr. Robert Chernomas, and the Manitoba Research Alliance, which is headed by Principal Investigator Shauna McKinnon. This event is hosted by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, CCPA. We are Canada's progressive leading research institute. CCPA research shows that our best values are possible. So if it's one of your first events with us, welcome. We're so glad you're here. If you've been to our events before, thanks for coming back. We're just so pleased that you're all here this evening. What our research does at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives shows is that we can take better care of one another when facing challenges of life that many people face. You know, disability, old age, unemployment, poverty, illness, and that we can do this better when we do these things together. And so our research shows how we can do this and protect the environment and rise to the challenge of climate change at the same time. So that's what we do at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And if you've watched us do it, I invite you to imagine how many core policy debates here in Manitoba, these very important conversations, would have unfolded if we had not been here for 27 years. And so we do this work thanks to our everyday supporters. I see many of you here in the room. Thank you so much. Thank you to our labor partners. And thank you if you are a donor. If you're not yet a donor, I invite you to become a donor. We need your support. Every little bit counts. And we do offer charitable tax receipts. So please look us up, policyalternatives.ca/give. And so it is thanks to our sponsors and supporters that we're able to put this event on for free this evening. I first heard of Alex Himelfarb when I read the book he co-edited with his son, Jordan Himelfarb. Tax is not a four-letter word, a different take on taxes in Canada. I could not put it down, and it was a book about taxes. I love the title, Tax is not a four-letter word, and after meeting Alex Himelfarb for the first time today, I understand a bit more about how the title comes from his cheeky sense of humor and dark wit, things that are needed now more than ever, of course. Alex Himelfarb is a unique public intellectual in Canada, as he is a progressive thinker who has held the highest position in the federal civil service, the clerk of the Privy Council and secretary to cabinet during the last years of Jean Chrétien's time as Prime Minister, which ended in 2003. So not only does he have these great evidence-based ideas, but he has experience putting them into action. It was his time when Himelfarb said he worked to restore, as he called it, program integrity after the damaging cut during the Prime Minister Paul Martin budgets of 93 to 95, and was part of negotiating some very important agreements, which I hope he'll talk about today. The one that I was particularly interested in was same-sex marriage becoming legal, the Canadian Health Accord, and doubling maternity leave in Canada during those years all came into being, and noted that there were no tax cuts while he was in that position. Alex Himelfarb was born in Germany and was raised and educated in Toronto. He received a PhD in sociology from the University of Toronto. He started his career as a professor of sociology at the University of New Brunswick in 1972. Himelfarb joined the Canadian Public Service in 1981 and served in the Department of Solicitor General of Canada, the Parole Board of Canada, Justice, Citizenship and Immigration, the Privy Council Office, Treasury Board, and was Deputy Minister of Canadian Heritage. So a broad range of topics there. In 2006, he was appointed as ambassador to Italy by Prime Minister Stephen Harper and representative to the World Food Programme, among other UN bodies. Alex Himelfarb is the founding chair of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, based at York University, and he was also chair of the World Wildlife Fund Canada and the National Office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Alex Himelfarb is the author of a new book, Breaking Free of Neoliberalism, Canada's Challenge. The book explains why neoliberalism, idealizing free market capitalism, persists, and what can be done to take dramatic action on issues like inequality and climate change. And this event is doubling as the Winnipeg book launch. We are very pleased that Alex Himelfarb will be in conversation tonight with Dr. Jesse Hajer. Jesse Hajer is an associate professor in economics and labor studies at the University of Manitoba, and interestingly also served as a senior civil servant in the Manitoba government as a senior project manager in the priorities and planning and community and economic development secretariats under the previous NDP government. And he's a co-editor of a forthcoming book called Public Service in Tough Times, Working Under Austerity in Manitoba, 2016 to 2022. So our format tonight is we have about 45 minutes of this conversation, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussion for the audience for about 45 minutes. And we do have copies of the book for sale if you would like to purchase a copy. If we run out, please buy a copy from your local bookseller, and then we'll have time for chats after as well. So I will now turn it over to our panelists.
Excellent. Alex, thanks for joining us here today. We're really fortunate to have you here to share your ideas with us. This whole format came from a friend of mine saying, "Hey Jesse, I'm coming to your talk later this week. I think a conversational format would work well." I tried to not take it as an insult that my past talks were incredibly boring. So if this doesn't work out, you have that tall guy there with the funny glasses to blame. Alex, thanks again for coming. You know, here in Manitoba, where I focus most of my research on Manitoba public policy, we've come through 7, I think, based on our research, it's not unfair to say brutal years of austerity. I think the ideas you put forward in your book on breaking free of neoliberalism really were at the core of that. I think we actually had probably one of the most traditional neoliberal conservative governments here in Manitoba, going back to the playbook of the kind of the founding policymakers that you've talked about in this book of Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Brian Mulroney. So I think those ideas are very relevant to us today, but I think you're going to tell us how relevant those are, and that a change in government isn't necessarily going to kick those ideas to the can. So really excited to talk to you about your book today. I thought we'd start out by giving you an opportunity to give a brief overview of your book. Like, what inspired you to write this book, Breaking Free of Neoliberalism, Canada's Challenge? Can you briefly summarize the central thesis for the audience?
No. Thanks, Jesse. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have a terrible relationship with microphones. So if this doesn't work, we'll try shouting.
Is that loud enough, or should I pass this one back and forth? It's good?
Is this loud
Okay.
enough? Okay. So what inspired me, this wasn't my idea. I cannot be blamed for this book. Notwithstanding that, by the way, great Christmas gift. Kids love this, you know. Come to the tree, neoliberalism. Whoa, thanks, Mom, Dad. Anyway, but I don't want to be too commercial. But what inspired me to write about neoliberalism? Jim Lorimer, publisher, phones me and he says, Alex, do you want to write a book about neoliberalism in Canada? And I thought, there's going to be two people in the world who are going to want to read this. Me and my wife's going to fake it. She's not really going to read it. But then I thought, you know, this is a pretty intriguing idea. I'd been in the government for 30 years. I joined the government on an interchange even before Molly's biography in 79, just at the end of Pierre Elliott Trudeau's time. And I retired from government, not from life, but I retired from government in 2009. So that's 30 years. And in those 30 years, you can blame me for everything that's gone wrong. And you know, we were in the middle of this. We could tell over the 80s and certainly by the 90s that something profound had changed. Now, this was not the public service I had joined, that something huge had changed. You know, the free trade deal, tax cuts, we'll talk about all the specifics. But the idea of what it meant to govern had changed. But while we were in the middle of that, I don't think we got, you know, when you're in the middle of a revolution, I don't think you get that you're in the middle of a revolution. So, you know, the people in the middle of the Industrial Revolution didn't say, hey, this is like the Industrial Revolution and we're in the middle. It's in retrospect that you understand how profound those changes were, how profoundly we changed what government's about, how profoundly we changed the country, and I think how profoundly we changed all of those things. And in retrospect, we also see the consequences of those changes. We see how much we've become part of an integrated continental economy. And when Trump throws flames and yells tariff, we understand that maybe those people who yelled that was a dangerous thing to do weren't stupid. That putting all your eggs in an unreliable basket's a dangerous thing. We saw how much our federation had become competitive, because every province now had to compete to get the investments they needed, and not only compete with each other, but with states that had low taxes. And we changed the nature of the federation in those 30 years. Inequality became extreme. And the people at the top of the ladder and the people at the bottom of the ladder breathed different air, and they couldn't even relate to each other. The people at the top could effectively secede from society. And the people at the bottom didn't want to pay taxes because they thought the system was rigged. They didn't have a chance. And people at the top didn't want to pay taxes because they thought they deserved all the wealth they had and they just wanted to keep it. We built insecurity that made people afraid of the future and gave, you know, my generation sucked the marrow, our generation, as I see many of you, sucked the marrow out of the bone. Our job was supposed to pass the planet off to the next generation at least as good as we got it. We failed. We gave them a more threatening world.
Who's we?
All of us.
Okay.
All of us. Me, you, all of us.
Okay.
We voted for governments that did it. We voted for tax cuts when we couldn't afford it. We voted for more change in our pockets instead of the public good. We did. We did. Are there exceptions? Well, except for me. Obviously, I didn't do it. But the rest of you did it. And you know, we also, you know, we were promised an age of prosperity and freedom, and what we got was an age of crisis, one crisis after another, headlined by climate change and the threat of fascism. It's all there. So looking at what we know now, I wanted to look back at those 30 years and understand, number one, how did we do it? How did it come? How did this stealthy, different way of thinking arise? And maybe by understanding how we got there stealthily, we could figure out how to get out of there. So that was the inspiration.
Excellent. So you center your book on this theme of neoliberalism, and it's not a word you use at the breakfast table. It's like give me some salt twisted meal. Yeah, well, maybe I do too. But I think part of our problem today, I think we'd argue, is that those who are looking for a more progressive vision to be implemented don't seem to be getting through as effectively as the right-wingers seem to be. So do you want to talk a little bit about this idea of neoliberalism? What does it mean, and why did you center your book on this concept? And what does it mean for government? What did it do to government? What does it mean for the lives of everyday people?
So when we were living with it, I didn't have a name for all the things that were happening, right? It didn't have a... But I came to, kind of after the fact, I came to understand that this was a package of things. This was a package of things. And I wanted to understand how that package came together. What was that package and how come we bought it, right? So now neoliberalism is an evolving or devolving thing. It's a moving target. If you sort of Google it, you'll find 200 writers with 200 definitions. But there are some common features. There is something. I mean, it looks a little different in every country, it looks a little different in practice, but there are some common features. My favorite definition is that it's free market capitalism with the gloves off. Right? It's hard free market capitalism. What does that mean? That means that we redefine that there is an almost single-minded focus on economic growth. Economic growth.
Excuse me, I'm not sure people at the back can hear you.
Can you?
Here, do you want me to try to put you?
But they're saying they can. Louder?
Yeah.
Is that better?
I think what happens, if you turn your head towards the mic, it works better.
Yeah.
So I'll just keep
We'll
looking
put it
this way?
there.
Okay.
Or you can hold it, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'll hold it. Thanks. So what it... Thank you. What a lovely moment.
That's how I feel.
No, you'll come back and get it. Wasn't that a lovely sharing moment? So what does it mean to be preoccupied with growth? You know, when Clinton ran his campaign, still no good? I do have this terrible relationship with microphones. Better?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When Clinton ran his campaign, his motto was, "The economy's stupid," and his message was growth at all costs. Growth is number one, and balanced budget, fiscal responsibility, growth. So this preoccupation with growth, what did that mean for government? It meant government's primary role was to create the conditions necessary for business to thrive. And above all, that meant eliminate as many of the barriers to profit as politics allows. That became government. The other feature of that was if the market was going to be where we got all the good things, competition in the market was going to deliver all the good things in life, then government should focus on stopping all the bad things from happening that interfere with the market. Crime control, security, defense. So it was a real shift in the role of government. So we went from the welfare state gradually to the security state. So that was that is for me what neoliberalism is. This free market capitalism with the gloves off, a preoccupation with growth, and a shift in the role of government to support business, right? To support profit and the right of profit that trumps all other rights.
Right. Your book is titled "Breaking Free of Neoliberalism." Now, is there something about the current moment in history that this is particularly important? I'm thinking about the timing. Maybe you could have written this book 10 years ago. Neoliberalism has been around for a while. Is it simply that you see an opportunity in this time? Is it more a case of desperation, that things have just gone totally off the rails and we have an absolute necessity to take up this challenge? Anything about this particular moment and what's going on? Is it even still neoliberalism that's dominating our political policy structure?
That was like 12 questions.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. But let me ask you, don't you have a sense that the world's upside down?
Yes. Yeah, I think the welfare state is actually the corporate state. I think they collect more corporate money and welfare than the others do. That's what I think.
I think you're not wrong. The world feels upside down. Crises are coming at us. Can you figure out which crisis to focus on from day to day? Is it affordability? Is it climate change? Is it fascism? The world feels upside down, unmoored. And I don't think anybody buys the promises of neoliberalism anymore. They don't buy that wealth is going to trickle down. They don't buy that the future is going to be better. They don't buy
like it.
They don't buy that prosperity and freedom are around the corner. They don't buy it, right? But they don't also have an alternative. So in Gramsci's terms, one of my favorite political theorists was a communist who wrote all his stuff in jail. So, but in any case, Gramsci was this guy in the 30s, and what he wrote was, there are periods in history where the old world is dying, but the new world cannot be born. We're in an in-between time, and he described that as a time of morbid symptoms. Yeah, hello. Sometimes translated as monsters, a time of monsters. Both of those seem to work for me. And so I thought, that's where we are. And this is not a time to be on the sidelines. This is a time for all of us to get involved. Because what happens in these in-between times is there's a war of position of deciding how the future is going to be laid out. And my own feeling was progressives are losing that war. And so we got to figure out how to win that war. Right now we're not winning. And
That's
even
true.
when progressives win elections, even when they win, they don't look like progressives. So they end up looking like the people they think will beat them next time. And so progressives lose to right-wing people, and then when they do win, they look like right-wing people. And so we're losing. And so I felt like this was the time to restore a kind of commitment to define a progressive path.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Can I ask you a question? What do you think of Bernie Sanders when Bernie Sanders
I like Bernie.
That was kind of like a Bernie bro myself. So
Yeah, I talk a lot about Bernie in my final chapter.
okay.
You should buy 2 books.
I should.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. So
No.
Some people would say what we have right now is not neoliberalism, right? Like the pro-globalization, rules-based order, free trade agreements, going smoothly. Some people say we have something different now. Donald Trump is not a neoliberal, but you challenged that idea in your book. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think he's like neoliberalism on steroids. You know, think about what he's promising. He's promising massive tax cuts for corporations and the rich. And he will deliver those. It's the only thing he delivered the last time, and he'll deliver them again. He's putting deregulators and dismantlers in charge of every agency, and he's going to crush the agencies that do any kind of regulation. He's going to unleash the oil and gas sector, and climate change come at me. I mean, he's going to do nothing for the people that voted for him. I mean, now in terms of so why people say, okay, he's breaking from free trade deals. He's not breaking from globalization. He's breaking from a rules-based approach to globalization, because he thinks this is the last moment where America has power, and they'll use that power to drive global commerce. We don't have that power, so look how cringing we are to save our lousy free trade deal. I mean, this is not a departure. If you think about neoliberalism as putting the right to profit over all other rights, as creating an atmosphere for the wealthy to get wealthier, then who better than, he's archetypal. Now what he has done, because you can't, it's really hard to sell people, I'm going to sell you, I'm going to reduce the programs you have, I'm going to make the water you drink more dangerous. It's a hard sell. I'm going to make education for your kids more expensive. I'm going to really screw you over. That's not a really great campaign. But so what he says is, I'm going to screw over the people you don't like.
Yeah.
I'm going to screw all the people that you're afraid of. I'm going to screw over immigrants. I'm going to screw over people of color. I'm going to screw over your neighbor that you don't like. Liberals that judge you all the time. I'm going to screw over the deep state that got us into this. And then you say, okay, as long as you're screwing them over, you can do whatever you want to me. So that sort of, and this is not the first time that neoliberalism is married to fascism. This is not. They did it in Chile. Neoliberalism, they've said it, they've written it. Hayek wrote it, Milton Friedman wrote it. They'd rather have a dictatorship that allowed a free market than a social democracy.
Man, that's so true. That is true.
So, is he a neoliberal? He was made possible by neoliberalism because he rides neoliberals' discontent and all of its failures, the inequality, the insecurity, our fears. He rides it and then he feeds it. He is neoliberalism. He is the embodiment of neoliberalism. He's not a break from it.
Yeah, one thing I found really interesting about your book relates to this.
One of the many things.
One of the many, dozens upon dozens of things that I found interesting in this
Well
book
said.
was this challenging of this idea that we've moved beyond neoliberalism. And another example of why this is the case that's sometimes given is this xenophobia, this racism that seems to be so transparently being leveraged right into the White House. But in your book, you also highlight this isn't so new. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Right-wingers have always sold hate. There's nothing new about it. When Hayek wrote the Road to Serfdom, Hayek in the 30s was sort of the pioneer of neoliberalism, co-founder of the Montpellier Society. In any case, when he wrote, he was very explicit that Anglo-Saxon values are more suited to the modern world, right? Not Latin values where they have all this collective stuff, and, and altruism and generosity and all that screwed up stuff that hurts the market. The Anglo-Saxon individualism is where it's at. Self-reliance, individualism. That's where it's at. He wrote that. He said that. He gave speeches on it. He supported the war that Thatcher ran against Argentina. That was there. Okay, advance forward. Thatcher was the most harsh against immigrants of any prime minister. She was so worried about the colonials coming to England, mostly colonials of color, that she changed the law even for colonials that had come, so they couldn't become citizens of Britain. So you had to be British, like in the blood. It was back to blood citizenship. That was Thatcher. Thatcher was a racist. Enoch Powell, one of the most right-wing racists, was her colleague. She was a racist. She brought racism to the mainstream. There's nothing new about it. Because it sells. When people are scared, it sells well. When people are feeling economic and cultural insecurity, you can sell racism and and immigration phobia. And she did it. Reagan talks about welfare queens, and everybody knew when he talked about welfare queens, he was talking about black women. And when he talked about young bucks, and all of them knew he was talking about young black men. And he would say the welfare queen is ripping us off, and everybody knew us black people getting welfare. I'm a taxpayer paying for them, and I don't like it. When he said the young buck is using his welfare check to buy steaks, and he said it, that's a quote. He wasn't messing around. Go forward to Bush, putting a poster of a black man saying, we gotta get tough on crime, and it's a black man.
Yeah.
And these same never-Trumper Republicans better take some shame in their, because they created him. There's a long history of using hate and fear to
I
sell
used to
things.
call them the three amigos, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Brian Mulroney.
Exactly.
At that particular time.
And you can use that fear, that hate, to sell policies that people would never otherwise buy.
We hear nowadays that these decades of neoliberalism have brought us to a point where we have inequality at record levels that we really haven't seen in 100 years. We have this political polarization. We have the rising cost of living. You talked about all these multiple crises we're dealing with. This us versus them attitude.
It's really depressing.
It's really depressing. So I want to ask you, though, it seems like the right, it seems like Trump and Poilievre in Canada seem to be riding that horse. They seem to be leveraging that discontent into power. What can we learn from that?
But, so I don't think everything in Canada is broken, but I think it's pretty screwed up. I don't think everything is broken, but who's saying right now that things are broken? Who is it? Is it the left or is it the right? Poilievre. He's saying Canada's broken. And people in pain hear it. They hear it and they get it. Right? And the people on the left are saying, yeah, it's not broken. Don't get so angry. But they are angry. And we have to read, how do you feel when you're virtuously angry, when you're righteously angry, and somebody says, no, don't be so emotional. Don't you just get angrier? What do you mean, don't we? Well, the left is making us angrier. The right gets our anger. Now, they have no solutions. They're going to do us damage. We had better get the anger, but we had better do what I call anger management. Focus it on the greed, on the corporations that are screwing us over, on big pharma. Rebalance power from private to public. Give them a bold agenda that says, I'm not, think about this. For decades, and I'm the culprit on this, for decades, we spent all of our energy on the progressive side protecting our institutions from the dismantlers, from the Austerians. The Austerians were privatizing healthcare, and we fought to protect it. I get that. I was there. The Austerians were dismantling program after program, and we were defending it. Kamala, who I think ran a really respectable campaign, was defending democracy. But nobody believes democracy is delivering the goods. You can't defend it anymore. You've got to promise something better. You've got to say, I'm going to give you a robust democracy that actually works. I'm going to give you a robust democracy that's based on equality, that takes power from the corporations and gives it back to people, that changes electoral laws, that brings in the every vote matter laws, that gives you an opportunity to have voice, that I'm going to bring democracy into the workplace, not just in our polity. That I'm going to, so we have to be bold. We have to promise that we're not defending these institutions. We're transforming them. And the left has gotten timid, and the left has become a force for conservatism. And, where is the left in Canada?
Weak. That's what I say.
And so, we can take a lesson from the right, not building on hate, not directing our anger at the most vulnerable, but directing our anger at the systems of oppression. The other thing about, this is very controversial, and people get really mad at me, my kids get mad at me, but the left is devouring itself. We have loads of powerful people on the left trying to do good things, but they hate each other. They won't join together. So, the lived experience is absolutely crucial, but so is the shared experience. And we're losing the second half of that equation. A lot of great change starts with identity politics, but no great change ends with identity politics. That if you don't reunite privilege and power, if you don't reunite identity and class, you lose. You lose. If you don't deal with bread and butter issues and everyday issues that worry working people, you lose. Now, we built the welfare state over the post-war period, and black people and women and people with disability were excluded. We can't do that again. So of course they have to be included. Of course it has to be part of it, but we have to reunite the issue of inclusion with the issue of equity.
I'd like to focus in on what's happening here in Manitoba right now, and a move to the left with a question mark here maybe, or maybe an exclamation mark, I don't know. Your book talks about solidarity and how important solidarity is. Manitoba recently elected Wab Kinew, Canada's first Indigenous Premier. Many heralded that victory as a rejection of the politics of division. It was a really nasty election campaign here. I'm not going to unearth it all. And what Wab Kinew put forward was this idea of one Manitoba, to try to bring people together around fixing healthcare, education, focusing on good jobs, affordability. In a way, he tried to sidestep some of the cultural issues or identity politics that you talk about, and focus on these bread and butter issues. Do you see something in that approach that could be a model for breaking free of neoliberalism, or at least getting us past this moment of ascendancy of the far right? And I'd highlight and keep in mind that the NDP under Premier Kinew has maintained and implemented some really massive tax cuts, put in some new ones of their own, committed to a balanced budget. Those are very neoliberal ideas. What do we got going on here in Manitoba, and is it something worth looking at closer?
Well, to have an Indigenous Premier is like a plus on its own. I'd rather have this government than the options, but I wish this government was good. So what does that mean? Number one, this Kamala's getting beat up in the States for being too woke. It's too much woke. The only people who talk about woke are the right-wingers.
That's a really joke.
Right? The only people who talk about it at all are the right. She didn't talk about it, but she understood that democracy had to be inclusive. And when Bernie ran his campaign, he didn't do a good job on issues of race. And Black Lives Matter attacked him, and he incorporated it because he's smart. So I don't think you can avoid those issues. I think you have to be inclusive. I just think you have to integrate class and identity. So I think it's a mistake to avoid those issues. Obama was a generational politician, impressive, great speaker. What's his legacy? Trump. What happened? Because he disappointed expectations. He didn't do enough on race, ironically. Maybe because it's hard for a black president to do. But you can't duck those issues. But the left has to go back to a class-based approach. Class and identity. And by the way, class is also an identity. So yeah, number one, I think we have these false polarities. I would like to see some integration on the left of those things. That's number one. Number two, the left spends a lot of time. One of my closest friends in Ottawa, and somebody I miss dearly, is Ed Broadway.
Oh,
great loss.
I meant it.
Great.
Sorry, I apologize. No
No problem. Great guy, great person, great leader, one of the great NDP leaders. On the other hand, he really screwed up in the free trade debates when he left it to the Liberals and didn't take the NDP. You know why? Because he didn't want the NDP to look soft on trade. And so your premier doesn't want to look soft on tax. So you don't want to look soft on tax. You end up looking like an idiot because you cannot deliver any of the goods you have, or you run huge deficits and the right kills you on it. You cannot do it. So you want a good life, you pay for it. We will get the future we're willing to pay for. And we have got to stop this, this notion that the best way we can help somebody is a tax holiday, a gas tax holiday, a GST tax holiday. Give me a effing break. The best way we can help people is to help people. And to help people, government's got to have resources.
I'm thinking about the nature of Canada's federal system and the amount of responsibility that's left to the provinces. You had a very unique perspective, being the head of the Public Service of Canada, but a lot of that also has to do with managing relationships with the province and dealing with the fact that we don't have higher and lower governments, we just have different levels of government when it comes to Canada and the provinces. If a province wanted to, how would they break free of neoliberalism? Can they do it by themselves? If Poilievre gets in, what latitude do we have to make changes here at the provincial level? And what are the consequences of trying to push that as far as we can?
Yeah. I mean, there are obviously limits to what any jurisdiction can do. There's limits to what Canada can do in a global society. There's limits to what provinces can do within Canada. But if you look at the states, so Gavin Newsom in California is already calling sort of emergency meetings of his legislature to say, what do we do to undo all the damage that we can expect? So there's always room, number one. Number two, neoliberalism started in the provinces. It did not start in the federal government. It started in BC and Alberta. Medicare started in Saskatchewan. Childcare started in Quebec. The guaranteed income is going to either start in Manitoba or PEI, if I can get you off your silliness. The source of, one of the great strengths of our federation is the possibility of innovation from the provinces percolating to the rest of the country. There's room as well to raise taxes. You can at least undo the nonsense tax cuts that the previous regime stuck the premier with. You can at least do that. But you can do more. I was picked up by Kyle and Molly at the airport, and we were coming in, we were talking about what you could do, how far could you take taxes. So I asked the question, what are Manitoba's great advantages? What's the strength of this place? I love Manitoba. I mentioned the jets and the bombers, but what do they know? So you have a diverse economy, right? You have a real sense of community. You have a very affordable standard of living. There's some real beauty here. Nobody in that thing mentioned low taxes. So will people really leave if you raise the taxes a bit? And the people who leave, is that tragic? So, I mean, there's risks. There are consequences to everything. There are consequences, political and behavioral consequences when you raise taxes. So you have to weigh those risks. But there are huge risks in passing on an unequal economy and a failing economy, infrastructure deficit, a failure to reconcile with Indigenous people, to next generations. You've got to weigh your risk. And how did we make fiscal health more important than human health? How did we do that? How did we make fiscal resiliency more important than human resiliency? How did we do that? We can undo that. You know, we got to balance risks. So yes, you have to balance fiscal risk, but those are not the only risks in the game. Is there room to be a leader in breaking free? Absolutely. And my hope was when Manitoba elected, and one of my good friends is the leader of the Liberal Party in Manitoba, and so I watched really closely. They're the former leader of the Liberal Party. And I was very hopeful that Manitoba could be a leader in breaking free of neoliberalism. And actually it has the population, diverse population, and a history to do it. So, could you lead the way? Within limits. But you could surely do some things that help change the country. And everything good in Canada actually started outside of government first, in civil society, and then outside of the federal government second.
Yep. So it's called like start at the bottom, top.
Well, I promised Molly I would keep to the time limit. So we got about 10 more minutes. So I want to ask you an open-ended question here about what we can do. So we can talk about coalitions, our hopes for the future, call to action. There's people coming out tonight, listen to you talk, care about what you're telling us. How can the left or progressives in Manitoba and across Canada challenge this entrenched ideology that seems so destructive? And do you see reason for optimism out there? Are there specific movements or policies that give you hope for overcoming neoliberalism? What's your last message for us here today before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know that's a tough one.
When I was talking to my dear wife and kids about writing this book, they said, "Oh, Dad, don't just add to the malaise. Don't just make this another dooms book. Oh, we're in despair. It's hopeless. You got to find some hope." But there's loads of hope. There's unbelievable energy out there to make change. They're just eating each other up. If we could ever bring them together. But you know, Pride, Black Lives Matter, Idle No More, all of those movements are one movement. Enough already, right? Enough of this shit. That's a technical policy term, but the energy is there. You know, I wrote years ago that every major change, number one, starts in civil society. It starts by creating room and pressure on governments to do the right thing. So we all have an obligation. And it takes a lot of different skills. It takes poets who allow us to see the possibilities of the future, who help us understand where we are and inspire us to act, but we're not all poets. It takes engineers that design the policies and make it real, but we're not all engineers. But it also takes warriors, organizers, and people, letter writers. We're not all good organizers. And these people tend to hate each other, but if we could ever get those people working together. So what do? At the dinner table, when somebody says, "We can't afford another tax cut," you say, "Bullshit." I'm calling out bullshit. You do it you take your own talents, whatever gifts, talents, and tools you have, and you do it. What do? You vote. It's not a bad thing. You vote. You join a party. You run for office. You join the public service. You join a movement. You create a movement. You join a protest. You do whatever you can with the tools you have, but you do not sit on the sidelines. And we all can make a difference. That's how big coalitions are built. Yeah, and by the way, we all wait for the leader that we can rally behind. But that leader emerges out of that kind of coalition. That leader's not, do you know who it is that we're
Yeah, Sammy, right here, he's right.
Are you the guy?
That guy, Sammy.
Well, if it's not you, and I don't know how busy you are, then leadership will emerge out of the social movements. Leadership will emerge. You know, to go back to Bernie Sanders or Corbyn, you know, did a lot of self-goals and made a lot of mistakes. But he was a movement politician. He rallied all of these movements together. He was a grassroots guy. He defied the party. He won the leadership of his party against all of the establishment because he went to the movement. The movement made him and he made the movement. He got 40% of the vote, which in our kind of system is huge, and he outperformed every labor leader before him. It was the party that killed him, not the voters.
True.
Sanders is a movement politician. He built on the Occupy movement. He built on the Black Lives movement. He built on the Me Too movement. He built on the indigenous movements. He built on all of those movements and rallied them. And it was the Democrats that killed him. It wasn't the voters. So what we need is to do our part, and leadership will emerge.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you.